Karen is very much involved on a family perspective. So she will tell us how, and you are going to be the first speaker, which is very important for us. Thanks very much to both for coming, and I will try to stay the most of the time here, but for the many commitment probably I will not be able. Grazie ancora Paola, grazie. Noi ci rivediamo presto. Okay, please. Thank you.
With a short movie about patient involvement. We made this movie for starting PhD students. Have a look. So I forgot to ask you to keep your post-its because you will need them later on. As you saw in the movie, we used this definition of patient involvement. It's from England, put together by Involve in 2013. And it's research being carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about, or for them. So it's really about creating partnership in your research and being equal to each other. What patient involvement is not. We don't mean it to say that researchers are not empathetic, don't understand us parents or anything like that. It's just that parents do have another perspective on disabilities than researchers do. Also, patient involvement should not be tokenistic, which means, it's always a little bit difficult to describe, but you can think you're involving parents. But sometimes involving parents is just signing a paper and then you think you involve parents because they said your idea is good. But that isn't really the involvement I mean. It's tokenistic. It looks like involvement, but it isn't. It's also not an easy way to get funding. If you have the signing, then you can get funding. It's not how we want to involve parents. And it's also not to make parents scientists. It's scientists are scientists and parents are parents, and we all have our own qualities which we can bring into our research. And this also relates to the definition, it's not being a respondent, it's not about filling in a questionnaire and then you have involved parents. It's about thinking with each other about what do we want to research. How can we implement the research in the daily lives of people? And actually everything in between forming of ideas and implementation in the research. I do have to talk a little bit about terminology because there are many words we use for involvement. In England they use involvement. In the Netherlands we use participation. In Canada they like engagement. But I hope when I talked about the definition, we will, no matter what term I or you use, we now know what we mean with this term. And there are also many words for the people you involve in your research. You can call it an experience expert, members of the public, as used by involve, patients, family members, clients. They, in my opinion, all mean the same. It means that you involve someone who knows about real life living with a disability. I would like to give you a small example. I know you can't read the letters, it's in Dutch, so most of you also won't understand if you could read it. But in the Netherlands, we as parents, together with researchers, made a research agenda. So we asked parents, what would you like to be researched in childhood rehabilitation research? So we collected 300 questions parents had, and then, well, it was a lot of work. Had to cut it down to 12 questions, which are really the questions of parents, not of researchers or healthcare professionals, but it's really bottom up, what do parents want to know about childhood rehabilitation. So, the post-its again. Now I talked a little bit about the definition of patient involvement. You can ask yourself, do the ideas you wrote down on your post-its match this definition? Do you still think it's patient involvement or not? Which ideas are patient involvement, which are not? Do you agree with the definition I gave? Just take some time to reflect on that for yourself. So, the dare to share was not just sharing with your neighbor. I would like to ask you if there's anyone who wants to share their post-it ideas or ideas about patient involvement or questions. Please, anyone? Yes?
Hi. Shall I set the idea and then what is related and not? Yeah. So a few years ago, I tried to do what I have heard in EACD conferences. First, for designing the project and to know the needs for the idea of the research protocol, I have done some interviews with families and listen about their needs. So I have found that most of these families were worried about that their children are not doing physical activity at all. And as a physiotherapist, I thought that this would be a very good idea for research. So I think there I have involved families for the idea. But then I tried to involve them in the research proposal. And this was very hard for me. Yeah, because it's true that different families have different needs. And also in research, I have a problem because we have to have a very homogeneous sample, and this is not the reality, so that was very difficult. And we applied for funds, but we didn't get it, so I have this project in a carpet without doing it, because it was very difficult for me, so I would like to know if some ideas could help me to improve this thing that I tried.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to share?
Thank you. So the situation is actually different in our setup. So the first thing that I did was, when dealing with children with cerebral palsy, I questioned the parents how they understood the problem. So most of the parents in our society, they think that the problem came from evil spirit, so they were hiding their children. So the first thing that we did was encouraging them to bring out the children. Then after, we were talking about the associated impairments, because most of the children, they had so many complications because they were at home. And we discussed with them how they could improve their functional abilities with repeated stimulation and repeated activities. So currently we are following the children and the parents in our neurology clinic. So that's how we engage the parents.
Thank you. Yeah, there's time for a third sharing.
For us, we try to encourage parents to make a choice because really children and families have different needs, and children are really different, and we want them to choose the time of the study and the circumstances of the study, because some children don't like crowded maybe some area, and don't like to I don't know, wake up very early. So we try to encourage parents to make a choice. I think that is really very important.
Thank you. So, you still have to keep your post-its, because we will use them later on. Why do we actually want to do patient involvement? The IHRF in 2015 formulated it as to achieve true partnership between public, patients and researchers, leading to improved research quality, relevance and outcomes. So I wanted to share an example with you from 2 weeks ago. I was in a room with some researchers, health care professionals, I think 2 parents and 2 patients with intellectual disability, is that the right term, okay. And we were talking about how to make working successful for people with an intellectual disability. And all the researchers and me as a parent too, we were talking about, well, the employer should be should understand the person with the intellectual disability, and the co-worker should do this and that. And then one of the guys with the intellectual disability put his hand in the air, so everybody got quiet and listened to him. And then he said, well, maybe if you want me to work, you should start by explaining what a job is to me, and that I have to be there at 9 a.m. in the morning. And that was, everybody was like, whoa, I didn't even think about explaining what a job is to someone, because it's so, from my perspective, really normal, and we as researchers all know what a job is and never explicitly talked about that with someone. But from the perspective of that guy with an intellectual disability, it was not that normal to know what a job is. And so he really brought in another perspective, which we really had to take into account when discussing how we can make working a success for people with an intellectual disability. So that really made clear for me why it's important to involve all perspectives in research, or actually every project you do for people, and you have to do it with them. So I dove into the literature and made a short list about why researchers want to do patient involvement. You can take a picture of this, yes. And researchers said they like to work together with patients to design study protocols to make it more feasible for the patients, to be sure that the questionnaires are not too long and that you ask the right questions to your patients. And well, what the example already said, they can bring in new perspectives into your research. And although I said before it's not an easy way to get funding, it does help to get funding if you involve patients. And it's proof that it can increase your study enrollment rates, and I know that it's always really hard to get enough people into your research. But if you involve patients, they have their own network of other patients who they can encourage to join your research. And it improves the credibility of your research, because you can prove it's really about what the patients need and want. And it gets easier to disseminate and implement the results of your research, also because of the network of the patients, and you are more sure that your results fit into real daily life of people with a disability. And you can, it can help to make your research more meaningful and understandable for patients. What we did in projects before is that patients help to write information materials about the research. And because the patients are involved in the research, they really get what your research is about, and then they can help to translate it in normal English or any other language. So this is why researchers can want to involve patients, but also for patients there are many benefits. What I said before, the research can become more meaningful and more understandable, and that's also something I, as a parent, patient, whatever, really like, because you do the research to improve my daily life, and then it's really nice if I understand what your research is about. And it's really nice to be listened to be able to share your story or the stories of others, and then use this experience in a positive way, because living with a child with a disability, it's not always that positive and pleasurable. I yeah, they're really hard times sometimes. And then it's, yeah, kind of a relief sometimes to go through all this shit and then still turn it into something positive for myself and also for the researchers, and then in the end also for other parents, patients. And it really helped me to feel empowered. I'm standing next to a professor, and it sounds weird, but I just learned by being involved in research that doctors and researchers are just people. Yes. I met him when he was the physician of my daughter 7 years ago, and then I was really like, whoa, he's a professor and a doctor, and he knows a lot. And now it's just Jules, and it's a whole other way to connect with each other, and it helps me to not see a doctor as someone really high and intelligent, but as a human, and I now dare to ask more questions and to stand up for myself and my daughter and say, well, no, this is not what's going to happen, because in my life it's different than in your room in the hospital. So it really helped to empower me too. So I'm talking about patient involvement, but I also know it's not easy. In the past 4 years, when I was involved in different projects, we encountered many difficult situations. So what I actually want you to do is now pick up your phone and think about what barriers do you see when involving patients in your research. What makes it difficult for you? Why maybe don't you do it? Didn't you do it until now? Or, well, what are your problems? And then if you pick up your phone, you can go to www.menti.com and fill in this code, and then you see a question which you can answer. I hope you all have Wi-Fi. Yeah. So I thought we were 33 people. So there's just one person. Oh, 35. 36. So I think we're finished now. I will take a picture of this because I don't trust technology. And you can take a picture of it too, of course. So it's always fun to see these word clouds appear on the screen. 37. Where? How? I think you're teasing me right now. Or maybe 2 cell phones and a laptop and an iPad. So, well, as you can see, the words time, motivation, communication are larger than the others, which means that there are more people who wrote this down. Yeah. Is there anybody who wants to share about what he wrote down and why it's a barrier to you? So maybe someone who wrote down time can share? So why is time a problem for you? What did you mean by it? It's actually easier to understand you without microphone.
I think by time or time consuming, but I'm thinking of it in two ways. First, it's a lot of the families that I meet have a very high burden of meetings and different kinds of things they as parents and the children have to do. So they have a lack of time, I would say. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about, because, I mean, when I ask them to participate, it's another thing I'm asking. And as when I work as a psychologist, I always try to manage things, not having them to be the manager. and of course, this means that a lot of parents have very little time to be a part of these kind of processes that I don't know because I haven't done them, but I think they take quite a lot of time. And the same for me as a researcher, I also have very little time. So I think that's, and also sometimes the funding is, you have very little time to apply for the funds. And then, yeah, so time is an issue, I think.
Yes. Is there anyone else who wants to share something?
Does somebody like to comment on this? Yeah? You.
When I put time, it's the same thought as, first I was thinking about the family's time and knowing that there's not a lot of it, and the parent we're asking to come for a meeting or for an interview is the best caregiver for their child, so potentially connecting that idea that they might have to arrange other things for their child depending on the age and the situation and so on. Or we could also think about, of course, if the child is old enough or the situation allows for engaging both. But that's a different type of setup, and he probably will comment on that.
Yeah. I would really like to comment on this, actually, because time is really a barrier for parents. But why do you think parents should come to the hospital to be interviewed? And why should my time be unpaid? Because to be honest, I'm paid for the work I do. And then it's not about filling in a questionnaire. But when I'm involved in research and meeting with researchers, sometimes it can be by Skype. But I'm paid for the work I do because my ideas are equal to the researchers' ideas and perspectives. So I'm equally paid, which means I don't have to do other work. I do have, because I will never get rich of being involved in research, but it gives, when I'm paid, it gives me time, actually. And we're also talking, in the Netherlands at least, with funders, that they shouldn't give this short time before the deadline for applying your research, and that they should give more time to be able to involve patients. But it's really a shift that should be made, and I can acknowledge that at this moment it's a problem. Yeah.
Can I ask a question then?
Of course.
Yeah. If you don't have funds, how do you pay the parents? Or are you often parts of big groups that have fundings from other projects? Or
at this moment, there's at least one organization in the Netherlands which is trying to get money from their own organization to pay parents before there's funding. Yeah, and it's not easy to create it, but they can somehow. Yeah, it is, yes. And we're also talking with funders about funding pre-funding. So, but I think it's not usual that it happens, and it's really maybe something you as researchers also can do and talk with funders about, that you maybe want to involve patients, but talk about what stops you from involving them, and yeah.
I work in research that actually can't be done at home because you need a movement analysis laboratory, so that makes it definitely more complicated. But then my question would be, would you prefer to be, if I would give something to my patients or the parents for coming and having their time to do my protocol, would you prefer to be, for example, paid, or that your kid would get a cinema ticket or something that they can do for fun?
I didn't really understood you. You were asking if I prefer to be paid or?
Or that the child itself would get a cinema ticket or something else fun that they can actually use for activities or social things?
I think it depends on the work I do, what I prefer. Yeah. And I think what's really important is to keep in mind, don't ask me, but ask your own parents, patients, what they want, because everybody is different. And I can, in this case, talk for myself and in general, but I think it's really the best to just ask the patients you want to involve what they want and what they like and what they need.
Okay, there was also motivation, and I'm very interested what somebody means with motivation. Motivation of who? Who wrote motivation? Quite a lot of people. Can you explain what you mean?
Yes, difficult to enroll, for example, adolescent with cerebral palsy. I have a difficult to enroll in my study because they are not interested in this research project and are not motivated because they have to return in hospital 2 times in the week, and it's very difficult for them and for their family to, because I know that this is a very important impact of habit of a family. Sorry for my English. My project.
So you're just talking about motivation of the patients? Yes. Well, I think money motivates. And well, what I said before, it can help if you don't ask people to come to you, but come to them when they're available, or Skype with each other, or any other device, and be flexible. Because if you're flexible, then patients...
Yeah. May I ask you, you made already your study protocol and then you tried to get patients. That was your issue about motivation. Yeah. So you didn't start at the very beginning. For perhaps is your subject of research totally not interesting for your target group? Could be.
Possibility too, yes.
I'm sorry if I step away a little bit from this, but just to understand the setup, is it that a research group usually has like a parent leader, such as yourself, for example, who is involved in many or all of the projects sort of as a parent representative, and then there are other parents who are asked to participate or give feedback? Or is it structured in a different way?
Well, at this moment we are writing a plan to structure patient involvement in the Netherlands. So I think there are many different forms you can use, and I prefer not just one parent being involved in many projects, because I'm different than other parents, and I actually prefer at least 2 parents being involved in one project. But we are now writing a plan to have 2 coordinators who coordinated the researchers and contact parents and researchers and connect them to each other. But I think there are probably also other forms. So I would like to go to continue with my presentation, and well, actually we are also already doing this a little, talking about solutions and how to do it. So I would like you to divide up in small groups around maybe 3 people, and then discuss with each other what your barriers are, and then design together a tool or write down ideas how to involve parents, how to overcome the barriers you see. And I will give you a small paper, yes, to write your tool down, your ideas. And then I would just hope you will think for yourself about how to solve barriers. And you can maybe take one of the latest projects of one of your group and discuss that with each other and discuss what could have helped you to involve more parents. I would like to ask you to not form a group with your neighbors and just try to meet other students in the room. It's okay for me if you leave the room and sit outside with each other or over here. If you come back in 10 minutes. Yes? So, welcome back everyone. I hope you had a nice break and you all had a short look at the posters. They will stay here the rest of the day, so you can have another look if you want to. Before the break, I let you think about tools you could use to involve parents. But in the Netherlands, we didn't sit still, and we also designed something, which I would like to present to you. It's called the Involvement Matrix. When I was involved in my first research project, at some point this idea came up. Well, maybe I will just first talk you through the involvement matrix. I think that's better. The involvement matrix is a tool to explicitly talk with each other about the tasks researchers and parents have in projects. On top you see the participation ladder, but we, how do we say that, sorry? It's not a ladder like down and up, but it's equal to each other, all the roles. There's a listener who listens and is given information. There's a co-thinker who is asked for their opinion. An advisor can give advice asked and unasked. And then you have a partner who is, well, an equal partner to everybody else. And you can be a decision maker who can take initiative in things. And then on the left you see the research cycle in short. You have the preparation phase of your research or project, the execution phase, and the implementation phase. And when you sit together with this tool, you can talk about what do we do in this project, which you can fill in on the left. In every phase you can write an information letter, do interviews, whatever you do in a project. You can fill in over there. And then you can talk with each other about what the parent and the researcher actually want to do. Do they just want to listen to how the researcher did the interviews, or maybe you find a parent who can do the interviews themselves, and maybe it can be of value in your research if a parent interviews in your research. Why we designed this tool is because in my first research project, this idea came up, and then I sat down with the researcher I worked with, and we filled in the matrix looking backwards to what I did. And the researcher wrote things. Her view on what I did was very different from my view. Where she thought I was a partner, I felt like a co-thinker. And looking backwards, I thought if we had explicitly talked about this beforehand, and she told me, you can be a partner in this part of the research, I would have felt, it would have been way easier for me to say to her, well, no, I don't agree with this, because I knew she saw me as a partner, and I was allowed to give my opinion. So it was a very interesting conversation with her, and made clear for us that it's really important to talk with each other about the roles you can have in research. And in the break I was talking with, I forgot your name, sorry, that relationships between researchers and parents are also very important. That really relates to me feeling confident to say I don't agree with this. If there's a really good relationship between a researcher and me as a parent, I feel free to say I don't agree or that I want something else. So yes, that's how and why we invented the involvement matrix. Now I do have a little assignment for you, because you all wrote down your ideas, the ways you involve patients, parents in your research on the post-its. Now I would really like you to get a post-it from someone else. And you can see over here, the involvement matrix, and put the post-its on the place where you think the post-it belongs in the matrix, or if it's not classified, you can put it over there. So maybe just the first row, you can go over there are the post-its. Just take one post-it and give it the right place. You can now see over here the explanations of the roles, and I forgot to. And I totally forgot that I have a print for you of the involvement matrix, which could have made it a lot easier to follow my talk, sorry. So if you... It's clear already. Okay. If you come forward for the post-it, and also take a handout. The second row can come forward for a post-it. So, is there anything that stands out for you if you look at the matrix and where all the post-its are placed? If you can see the matrix right now, sorry. Is there anyone who wants to share something about it? Or maybe about the post-it you had and what you were thinking when you had to decide where to place it. If there's no one who wants to share, then I can say something about it. Yeah?
Well, the post-it I had in my hands involved, I think, also just including patients for data collection of research. And I also see my post-it, which is similarly put under the partner category. But I think that from the definition, the objective definition, that it doesn't really count as a partner because they're not actually equal partners if you just include your participants for data collection. So I think we might have to be careful with that conclusion, because I now realize that I considered them as a partner while they're actually not. Yeah. So I'm definitely taking that into account for future research.
Yes, thank you. So, because I don't have much time left, I will make a comment about the matrix. What I saw is that many of the post-its are on the left of the matrix. And what do I want to say about it? It's not wrong, because every role in a matrix is important, and it's not wrong to be just a listener, because you're not just a listener, you're a listener. And maybe if you know for a parent that can be enough, it can be what the parent wants to be at that moment. So it's not wrong if all the post-its are on the left. It's just really important that you're aware of the possibilities, that you're aware that there are also other roles, and also that parents don't have to be involved only in thinking about what to research and implementation, that parents can be involved in all parts of the research. So there's nothing wrong with what the matrix looks like. It's just be aware of what all the possibilities are, and talk with it explicitly with parents, patients you involve in your research. I think that's the most important, the awareness of this. So, in Canada, there's a course about family engagement in research, and in this course, parents and researchers together made tools about patient involvement. I'm not going to talk very long about this. In the handout I gave you, there's the website, the link to the website where you can find the tools. I will just very quickly go through. Many groups made infographics like this. And this is a flyer we made ourselves with Ouder Inzicht, which is also in the handout. And then I will go to, I think, the most important thing you will do today in my part of the workshop, and that's think about how you yourself can involve parents, patients, experience experts in your research this week, because you will be thinking about research questions and further on in research. Who can you involve in your research? Who do you know? Which parent, patient do you know who can think together with you this week? So in the handout, I left some space open where you can write down names of persons you think about right now. And maybe that it can also be colleagues who you will talk with about this, who maybe know patients, parents. So I would really like you to think about this and write it down and reach out to these persons this week. I will give you 3 minutes. By the way, I wrote down partners. It doesn't exactly mean partners from the matrix. It's just someone who you can work with. So, I hope you were all able to write down at least one name of a person you will reach out to this week. And that will be the end of my presentation workshop. There's time for a quick question if there's any. And otherwise, I'm pretty sure you will be forced to ask me questions in the next part. There's one question, yeah.
Yes, thank you for an interesting start of this day. I experience that we often have a problem that families and parents not always believing in our research and in evidence-based medicine, because they are looking up a lot of information by themselves, for example, as on internet and information from other parts of the world. and it's not always the best options for their children, as our opinion. What do you think is the main reason that it is like this? And how do you think we can...
Yes. I think there are many parents who don't really understand research. So, well, what we are trying to do with our organization Ouder Inzicht is not only bringing parents towards researchers, but also the other way around, and explain what research is about and why we do it, how we do it. So that can be a part of a solution. I think it's also really important to listen to parents. Why do they want to do treatments which are not proven yet, maybe? And maybe talk with them, and maybe you can set up a research about treatments they find somewhere. And I think there will always be stubborn people who don't want to listen. So, yeah, that's also something we have to live with, I think, partly. Yeah? Another question?
I'm wondering how you deal with people, people of language barriers or children with, for example, intellectual disabilities. Do you have recommendations how to involve the children or parents who speak another language in research?
It's difficult. Yeah. I'm not really involved in research with people with learning disabilities, but I know there's a professor in the Netherlands who is, and he probably knows a lot more about how to involve them in research. And the language barrier is a barrier, and I don't have a solution yet, other than, yeah, well, it can be a solution if you ask a tolk, someone who translates.
An interpreter.
Yeah. So that, yeah, and then I think you have to start with money for someone like that. But
yeah, in the Netherlands you can always ask for an interpreter by telephone. And I think even when they speak to some degree your language, but they are from abroad, it's very important about sensitive subjects to use an interpreter, that they can talk in their own language. That's often overestimated for, oh, they are speaking well, but things about health and your child. There's no interpreter in that language?
No. Sorry. I say a lot of the times when you speak and use an interpreter, the words that you are using doesn't exist in the other language. So there will always be like a cultural part of the communication where you will have to work to know that you're talking about the same thing, because like if I'm using the word anxiety, it doesn't exist in Persian, for example. So I mean, you always have to know a little bit about the culture also.
Yeah.
yes.
That's true. A hand? Wait. I like comments.
Sorry, I'm full of comments today. No, I wanted to comment that there are medical interpreters. I don't think that they're accessible from everywhere and for everyone, but if telephones can be used, there are services like that that might make it more clear, and they're more experienced about talking, for example, consent and things like that.